Okay, so welcome to the Mission 4 commentary for T2X. This was a mission that turned out a lot better than we thought it would at the beginning, shadowing the enemy. And one of the early things that we were dealing with as far as the story was that we didn't want the smugglers to operate from the city. We've spent so much time in the city in both of the games, and we didn't want to get into anything radically different, but we did want to give Isaiah and the players a chance to get away from the city into someplace else, whether it be just the smugglers' caves that were somewhere far away, or if she travels to another city. But we wanted to explore kind of that possibility of removing her from that familiar element, at least for a couple of missions. And so the idea for Sunnyport came up, and one of the things we started doing right off the bat was, you've got this dark new sect or faction, the smugglers, who kill people and steal things, and they're smugglers, and so the idea was to contrast that with this place where they were from being called Sunnyport, and everything being bright and cheery, and just an absolute contrast to the city in many ways. So we had this problem of, where do these guys live? How does Zaya get to their hideout? I mean, what is she going to do? And so the obvious thing, the obvious answer to that is she's going to track them and follow them there, kind of like we followed Ramirez's guards and assassins, or the way that we followed Corporal whatever her name is, and Mosley. Thank you. And Courier and Thief 2. So we wanted it to be part of it, but we also wanted there to be something different about that. How does she get there? And of course, then the idea for the train came about, the steam carriage that would also allow us to again speak to the timeline of Thief, that the mechanists are on the rise and building some things. They had the Cetus Amicus, the submarine, and they're venturing into these areas of technology where the Hammerites have not gone, and where it's really far beyond anything that we've seen in the city. And we thought that the steam carriage was plausible, and just give us a chance for some new types of gameplay and some exploration, things that we hadn't seen before in fan missions of the original game.
Yeah, that was by far, I think, our biggest technical challenge over the whole project, was getting that to work. And at the very start, when we were discussing the idea for a train or a steam carriage, a lot of people were opposed to it because they didn't believe that we could make it work technically. Right. And as mission design lead, it was kind of my call at the time to guide the story and to determine whether or not I thought that we could get away with it. And I always thought we could. I always thought we could scale it and make it as extravagant or as scaled back as we needed it to be. And sure enough, we ended up being able to pull off a lot more than we thought we would.
Well, do you remember in the chats, though, that there was, for a while, the idea was floating around about, no pun intended, but there was this idea floating around about using a Zeppelin. Do you remember that?
Vaguely.
Could we do we need to do something, some type of vehicle. They've already done the submarine, and the train's going to be too hard. Could we do a balloon? And I think that was discussed for a while, and then rejected, because obviously that would be just virtually impossible with the dark.
Yeah, and it might not be quite as serious like a train. I think we could still make dark and steampunky and incorporate a lot of cool elements into it. So we decided to go with that. And I guess the next thing we had to determine was how much of a role the train would play in the mission. And so ultimately we decided we needed 3 distinct sections. We needed a train platform at the very start, or a station. We needed the train itself, and then we wanted to have a little area at the end where the player would be introduced to Sunnyport for the first time. And that's really where Act 1 of the story kind of ends, and Act 2 begins when the player is first introduced to this new location following this new faction, the Smugglers.
Right, and we were real excited about that. Was one of the most enjoyable things, I think, for the plot guys, was coming up with a new location, not a new location within the city, but this whole new area in the Thief universe that it's never been explored before, which of course you can do in fan missions and stuff. But it was just neat that we were going to get to take her there and be there for 3 or 4 missions, and that meant that we had to flesh the whole thing out. Things that never even ended up in the game. What is the government like there? What's their relationship to the city? Who, does the Baron have any kind of authority here? What's the police force like? What are the locals like? What's the weather like? I mean, everything that we possibly could. Of course, a lot of that never ends up in the game, but it helped us to kind of, as much as the city is a character, you wanted Sunnyport to be a character too, and so we kind of got into all that. And I remember the train was our big secret for a while. We talked about it in chat, and don't let this out because we don't want anybody to steal this idea. And then there was rumor floating around that it was going to show up in the Circle campaign, and I don't think it ever did or was going to, but it was just, and we thought, we've got somebody, we have an infiltrator, we've got somebody.
There's a lot of paranoia.
A lot of paranoia, and of course this was right after Looking Glass had closed and all that, but I think since then the community really we're not like that as much anymore. People want to help each other out and share, whatever technology
not quite as cutthroat
they have.
As it used to be.
Right. I mean, it was pretty funny though. We were trying to figure out, who told, who was the rat, but it ended up not being anything,
Yeah, I think that's actually kind of unfortunate because there were some contributors to the project, particularly in the art and sound departments, who didn't get to see very much of the game or who never really got to play the mission in Dramette. I mean, we would send out screenshots and plot summaries and things like that, but for a short period of time, we were actually very... we guarded like all our secrets very carefully, and I really wonder if that was the best thing to do now in retrospect.
Well, a lot of them we've revealed since then, but and you start this mission, you see the smugglers, and hopefully the player knows.
Yeah, hopefully the player recognizes them from the first mission or recognizes their voices or whatever, and they've seen their objective not to get seen or caught by the smugglers or attack them or whatever, because fictionally the player has to follow them to this location and kind of just shadow them, trace them. And but we thought it was very unlikely if we put the smugglers out at the start there that players would just run right out and get seen right away and fail. But if they did, if you get a player who's like an idiot who just like runs out there right away and they fail an objective, then all they have to do is start back 5 or 10 feet. So it's really not that much of a penalty.
And here again, we're on a rooftop. Even though it's a small rooftop and just a little bitty section, I love how we were able to get so many rooftops in some of these missions, even if it's just a little bit, because again, that's just such a hallmark of the
Thief universe games. Being up high. Yeah.
Right.
It's actually interesting talking about the development history of this map. This was one that was originally taken by Avalon,
right?
And he started with the train itself and built, I think, like 7 cars. We ended up keeping most of them and roughed those out really well, and then had a few different drafts of what the station was to be, and they were all pretty rough. They were just brushwork, no lighting or gameplay or anything like that. And he had a hard time, I think, deciding what he wanted to do with the station. We went through several different drafts, and eventually he almost kind of gave up, and he said, well, like, I think maybe that we should just keep it to the station platform and not actually have like this really big elaborate station. But I actually stopped him then, and when I took over the map, I really liked one of the early drafts he had, which is kind of similar to what you see here, where you have this kind of 3-tiered station with these big kind of Romanesque vaults in the ceiling, and I liked the design, so I took it and ended up fleshing this out and like put in all the detail. This was really rough. It was basically just the ceiling and arches when I first took it over, and I filled out this whole space, and I thought we could get some really interesting gameplay out of it here by having these non-hostile nobles and mechanists like walking around.
Right. Well, it's also again an opportunity to kind of show that the mechanists are on the rise, and I'd probably mention the skins that are being used here for these mechanists. They look a lot like the Hammerites, and we were hoping, I don't know how many people caught that, but we were hoping that it would be obvious that this is the early days of the Mechanist movie. They still look a lot like the Hammerites, even though they've got the cog on their chest. So the colors are like the Hammerites, and so there's a transition that's taking place there within the Hammerite order. You've got this faction that's starting to break away, and we wanted to try to visually represent that by the uniforms and some of the banners even that are hanging around in the station and stuff. It's not what we saw in Thief 2, but it's
very similar.
Very similar. We're moving that direction.
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't like the art direction on the Mechanist in Thief 2 a whole lot compared to the other factions, and so when we had the opportunity to redo them, we thought we could make them a little bit more ornate, use kind of the darker maroon color again, play with the designs on their chest and on their weaponry and so forth, and we ended up with a look that I think was really pretty cool.
And I found out by accident that the EMP grenades would put out lights. I just always use them on cameras, even in beta testing and stuff. And then I think it was even after the game was released, I accidentally tossed one at a light, and I went, "Oh wow, it works on." Well, duh, of course it works on lights. I wonder how many people didn't even try that.
Yeah, that was our new weapon that we introduced. And again, Thief doesn't have a history of having a really strict way of introducing new weapons or forcing the player to use them. We kind of present them in the store and give them written descriptions and encourage the player to use them, but we don't really ever force it. So it basically just encourages a lot of experimentation. I kind of wonder how many people figured that out with the EMP grenades.
Yeah.
But there was actually some controversy over calling them EMP grenades, because they're like, people would they really work on steampunk powered lights, and we're like, we don't really care. What we were concerned about was really communicating the function in the name, and so that was the only thing that really communicated the idea, I think.
Well, you're dealing with a mythology where a pagan goat god plucks out somebody's eye in the beginning and it's replaced with a mechanic. You're kind of beyond the bounds of what's realistic. I mean, you want to
some extent. I mean, you would just want to meet player expectation, I think. And so with the EMP grenades, we wanted to make it clear that it would work on anything that was electrical or steam powered in the world. And really, we want the basic goal of having those was to give players a little bit more flexibility in terms of creating stealth space, because typically you can't put out the steam powered lights.
Well, it was an answer to that from Thief 2, where how do I get these gas lights to
go out? And the other thing we wanted to do is really to give the player a quick and easy solution to taking out some of the harder Mechanist bots, because a lot of people had a hard time figuring out ways to kill the Mechanist bots in Thief 2, or just found that they were too challenging. So
or just annoying,
or just annoying, really.
Like
so
a quick way to dispatch them,
Yeah.
And I was actually glad for that we ended up in this we decided to be in the time period that we were, so that we didn't have to deal with the robots a lot, because and I think it allowed us to spend more time with some of the undead missions and stuff, which some people didn't like, but I think as a majority, especially the Thief community, has they enjoy the Bone Horde and some Return to the Cathedral and some of that stuff, and we really wanted to take time to revisit those types of environments.
So speaking of environments in our art direction, I'll mention the art direction we had for the environment for this level real quick. Thief 2 basically used kind of a really bizarre Art Deco style for the Mechanist areas. It was kind of like these orthogonal, like boxy areas with this really like gaudy kind of wallpaper, from the early 20th century, and it was just kind of weird. It was fantasy oriented, but it still always felt kind of out of place to me. So when we approached the art direction for this map, we wanted to kind of reinvent the aesthetic and play with it a little bit and see what we could get away with. And the look that we ultimately ended up going with was really this kind of smooth, curvy, like Romanesque architecture with these simple curved rounded arches and vaults, and this stonework texture that had steampunk elements incorporated in. I think it turned out pretty well.
Yeah, this was a nice space, and I actually could have stood for the station to be a little bit bigger than it was. Of course, gameplay wise, it wouldn't have made sense, but it was. This was a real unique environment that I don't think we'd really been in a space like this in the original games, and I don't think we get back into it in this expansion either. But it was a nice little diversion, from what we normally see. And again, we didn't want to get too much into the whole Mechanist Hammerite split and all that. Just enough to pay homage to it and acknowledge it. But then they were just, it was a convenient way using technology to get her out of the city to where the smugglers were. The Mechanists came in real handy in that aspect. So it was kind of nice.
So here we go. We force the player to get onto the train, and there's a couple different ways that you can do it. There's tickets that are floating around on different nobles in the station itself, but we don't make it so easy to allow you to pickpocket them. And the reason that we don't is because pickpocketing doesn't really work very well on non-hostile AIs in Thief, and it's a code thing, it's a programming thing that we couldn't solve. What happens is basically you're allowed to pickpocket an AI who is aware of you, which means they can turn hostile on you, and you have no way of knowing whether or not it's safe to pickpocket them. And that can be very frustrating and very unclear. So we wanted to stay away as much as possible from putting pickpocketable items on non-hostile AIs. And then the other reason was really we just didn't want to make it, we just didn't want to give the player a traditional out to get the ticket. We wanted to force them to think. And so there's two places where you can get him. One is in a noble's hand, and you have to knock him out or kill him, which is very difficult in a crowded station, and take it from his hand. Or you have to find a way to sneak behind the counter, the front ticketing counter, and steal a ticket from behind the counter, and that's also very challenging to do stealthily.
Well, especially if you're playing ghost style, which many people do.
Yeah, and if you're playing ghost style, like we had a third option, which was basically to not get a ticket, but rather to go through the hidden mechanist restricted area, and then end up on the roof of the train and get in that way.
Yeah.
So here we go. We actually teleported to the train, and this is the first time the player sees it.
And you don't want to see it without the fog on. Always have your fogging on. Your weather and fogging has to be turned on for the train to work.
Yeah. So we knew that we wanted the train to appear in motion and realistic, and that was very challenging. We had to do several different things. We had to create these invisible conveyor belts basically beneath the train that would transport AIs backwards when you threw them off the train. So objects would be destroyed and AIs would be transported backwards. The actual terrain itself are basically gigantic objects which are moved like elevators through there. So the geometry that you're standing on, the train that you're standing on, does not move. That's stationary. It just creates the illusion of movement like most games by moving everything around it. That was very technically challenging in Dromad because the engine was never made to do anything even remotely like that. We had to fight all kinds of visual errors and anomalies. We had to fight scripting errors. I don't know. It was just an incredible hassle. And then on top of all that, the biggest challenge, I think, was making it run. Because when spaces are built like this, they're basically open cars with doors at either end. Nothing occludes. And you can't count on doors closing and occluding things. It's just not going to work like that. When we first ran this map, when Avalon first roughed this out, it was like a couple thousand polygons. It would just crash every time that you tried to run it. And we talked about making it so simple that it could render all the polygons at once, but that was fruitless. We couldn't have the level of detail that we wanted. And so what we ended up having to do with this primitive technology was essentially create these giant antiportals, like these giant negative occluders, doors, that exist between each one of the train cars that are invisible, and they block everything behind them. And then at specific intervals, we close and open the doors before you get there, so you never see them. But what's actually going on is there's this really hacky script method that we use to block everything in order to get this to run. And now it does. It runs perfectly well.
I remember when you guys finished this, it was just like this kind of everybody wanted to celebrate and drink a lot. Because it was just like it was such a pain in the ass, for so long, and it was the big challenge. It's like this is one of the missions that's really going to make our expansion stand out from other campaigns, and this will be memorable because it's never been done before. And it was just I remember once you guys accomplished it, I remember that being a point where I felt like, man, we're really doing this. This is going to happen, and it's going to be something that's special.
It's interesting.
I haven't seen anything like this even since. I don't think anybody's done it.
You see train levels in games like all the time. There's one obviously like in Gears of War and like some of the old Unreal Tournament.
Splinter Cell has one.
Yeah, Splinter Cell and any number of other games, Soldier of Fortune, like many games. But usually when you're fighting on a train in those environments, you're very restricted in terms of where you can go. You have a pretty linear path, and you're shooting guys, and it's very action oriented. I've never really seen an exploratory game where you're allowed to really go and look at everything like while the train is moving, and that's really what we wanted to do. We wanted to allow the player to go anywhere, like above the train, below the train, like in different hidden compartments, and really get the same kind of exploratory gameplay that they'd get elsewhere in any other mission, but make it on this gigantic moving object.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, you've got some stuff like that in No One Lives Forever. I think there's a plane mission, and there may even be a train one. I can't remember exactly, but I know you're not. you don't get off, you don't climb on top of the train and see the train moving by. That was the challenge, was to, I mean, it would have been real easy to come up with a cheesy way to block out the windows and have no balconies, side balconies or doors.
Yeah.
But, we felt like that was cheating,
Yeah, I always thought worst case scenario, that's what we would do in order to get this map to work. But fortunately, we didn't have to. We were able to do this big, expansive map.
And the thing was, it was crucial because if we can't get the train to work, we have to bring the smugglers closer to the city or even put them in the city, which totally cancels out the idea of going outside of the city to a new location for their hideout. If she can't take some kind of fast transportation to get a long way away, what do you do? So it was a lot of even our whole fiction with the smugglers really depended on this working. So we were kind of holding our breath, waiting for this train to work. And then once it worked, we felt like, okay, was a pretty big obstacle, not just technically, obviously, but also I know all the riders breathed a sigh of relief because we were trying to figure out at that point if this doesn't work. I don't think we even discussed this with you, but I remember some conversations like, "Oh God, if this train doesn't work, what the hell are we going to do, man?" Because we're going to have to write around that.
Put all our eggs in this basket. Put all your faith in me. Thanks.
Right? Yeah, we knew you could come through, man.
No, I mean, I knew we could get it to work in some form or another, but we did work on it for a very long time. I think we started working on it like 2.5 years before we finished, and we were working on it literally like every month up until the time that we were done.
Well, I remember even when we were debugging at the end there, we were still having problems with objects.
Yeah, we still had some visibility issues with pieces of the terrain randomly disappearing and everything else.
Big stuff, not little bugs like the key isn't where it's supposed to be, or this is a big thing.
Yeah, one of the biggest things we discovered, which is I think Thief is the only shipping game that I know this is the case, but the proximity triggers, the bounce triggers are called in Thief, are proved to be unreliable about like 1 or 2% of the time. And we were originally using these proximity triggers to determine the visibility, like those close and opening portals that allow the whole train to render. And they proved unreliable in some very unpredictable circumstances. And so we ended up having to ditch that whole idea and use a different signal-based system, what's called like sources and receptrons in Thief, in order to get it to work. It was this completely other scripting system that was kind of counterintuitive to hooking that up and getting it to work, and that was like a last-minute change that we did.
Well, and it was weird too because everybody's machine would react differently to it, and so you'd get different problems with different machines, and trying to isolate, is this the scripting or whatever that we're using, or is it, what's causing this? And then eventually, like you say, you guys scrapped that and just went with something completely different. So
yeah, Dromhead and the Dark Engine have like 5 different scripting systems, and none of them are related even remotely. So it's interesting trying to hook things up and get things exactly the way that you want it.
So here she sees the smugglers down there. She confirms that she's in the right place and still on their trail and all that. We don't want to run in there with them, obviously, and expose ourselves. That was the big trick too. Is you wanted to make these missions in such a way that the player could, interact with the environment, obviously, and interact with the AI, and knock people out and all that stuff. But you had to be real careful because Zaya can't reveal herself too much to the smugglers, and definitely the Hammerites later on. And so you want to keep confrontations to a minimum, but I think we managed to story-wise to get by with it.
And it's a different kind of stealth here again, and we hope players pick up on it. But most of the guards are again here non-hostile, but you have to avoid openly attacking people or openly lock-picking people, or not people, openly lock-picking doors and stuff like that.
Right.
But it kind of works, and we force the player to do some of those things in order to get all the loot. So players are going to want to lockpick and take people out and steal stuff.
Right.
And that all creates dangerous scenarios for them. Like here, I get caught up here, I think.
I always get caught up here.
Yeah. So you take the money off the gambling table, the guard gets pissed off, and then comes after you.
Now there is a way you can do that by crouching down. I mean, you can ghost that, and
yeah, there are ways to do all that. I just got caught here.
But, and here's another one of our fat models.
Yes, that you can't carry. But here it doesn't matter because I just went on a rampage and just...
Now, could the players... I don't remember...
everyone.
Did I probably checked for this in beta testing, but can the guards follow you from one car to another? They can.
They can. Yeah, that was another problem that we had to solve
for a while.
The pathing system in Thief is completely automated. We don't have the same kind of flexibility that we do in modern engines to modify the path, but ironically, it's one of the most robust path systems I think that I've ever encountered in a game before. The AI will just follow you anywhere.
They're relentless, except up ladders.
Except up ladders. Yeah, except any obvious like vertical space like that. But it's really good. Pathing system is really good. Yeah. So here we force the player to go through the train in one direction, and then we force them to go back in the other. We thought that was an important element of gameplay in this map. And we didn't want to just have it one way or completely linear. And because you can go on the roofs and you can go through the main body of the train cars, we wanted to make sure that you could go back and forth. And most of these themed cars originally came from Avalon. The final look and the lighting and the final polish and everything was done by me, but Avalon is the one who came up with the different themes for the cars. So we have like a dining car, a sitting car, a gambling car. We have the sleeping car, we have the kitchen, and then at the very end we have kind of like the specialty suite car, which is where the nobles are dancing and
we definitely wanted to make sure it wasn't just like a third class passenger train. This is an invention that the mechanists are using as a bid for the affection of the nobility. It's a posh thing that only wealthy people can afford, because you remember that's who they ended up in Thief 2. The servants all ended up in the houses of most of the nobility. So I don't know how many people picked up on that, but it was definitely something in our minds that this needs to be whatever it is. It needs to appeal to not the working class, but the lords and the ladies and all the people with a lot of money, because the mechanists are trying. Karras is on this mission to endear himself to those people, and this posh train that goes to this tourist town of Sunnyport is definitely a step in that direction for him.
Yeah.
So now we're in Sunnyport. I love Sunnyport.
Yeah, this mission or this part of the mission was developed by Duncan. We actually had an original designer at the very beginning of the project building one of the maps, Mission 5, the next map exclusively, which only contained a part of Sunnyport. And that didn't work out for a variety of reasons, but we felt like when Duncan came on board, rather than try to build each part of Sunnyport separately, we thought it would make more sense for him to build the entire town and then incorporate that into different missions. And so here you see like a little corner of that.
Right, and we had to block certain sections off for different things. And this originally through here was
Smuggler
fleshed
caves.
out originally. The tourist section of not the smuggler caves that we go to, but there was the original smuggler caves way back that the Hammerites cleaned out years ago had been turned into a tourist attraction event, and I think Duncan had actually fleshed all that out at one point in a build, and it just became, it was too much, and there wasn't really a purpose for it.
And we decided it was a little confusing.
Right.
So the idea being that the smugglers are able to operate in this town here without anybody knowing about them, or without anybody really recognizing the fact that they're smugglers.
Right. And here again, I talked about the contrast of the evil and the wickedness of the smugglers being contrasted with this nice, bright, touristy, glossy town of city of Sunnyport. They're using as a front, not a weapons shop or a metal shop, or it's a candy store. Because they just we just wanted to make it as much of a contrast as possible. These rough looking guys with the full beards and the raggedy clothes and all that, running a candy shop. I mean, it's kind of obvious what's going on there, but I just thought that was an interesting little
interesting piece of fiction. Yeah. And so you have to follow them all the way through the city here. This actually directly harkens back all the way to Thief 1 and the Mission Assassins, where you have to follow these guys through the city until you reach your ultimate objective at a mansion. And this is pretty much almost lifted identically in terms of gameplay. You have to follow these guys and not be seen when they look back at you. So it's pretty straightforward stealth, but it works, and
And I thought it was just the right amount too. We don't want we've done the thing of following people so much, twice really in the second game, and then of course once in the first one. So to have a whole mission like that would have been a little ridiculous. But this just seemed like the right amount. And you have to give props to Duncan for kind of making this a short little space. It's a short little space, but you still get to kind of get an idea of what the city is, what Sunnyport is all about, what it's like, and there's some readables along the way if you want to stop and and read them, and so you get to see all that. Plus, now you're even in the rundown part of town, so you recognize that while it's a tourist attraction, there's a seedy side of town and
as well, yeah,
some rundown places, and that's obviously where these guys are hiding out. We had some. I didn't have a lot of specific ideas about the smuggler caves that we're going to be at in the next mission, but we definitely had some real specific desires for Sunnyport, and Duncan just came through beautifully, and it was exactly what we envisioned in the plot meetings for this environment.
And we'll get to talk about that a lot more in Mission 8 when we get there pretty soon.